into everything new. Everything now is all, and all shall be well when I awake. When I awake and I see with new eyes, I offer thanksgiving as I look to the sky. Everything now is all, and all shall be well when I awake. I awake fragrance of love from the Redeemer, where we are the dream, and you are the dreamer, with the fragrance of love from the Redeemer, where we are the dream, and you are the dreamer, with the fragrance of love from the Redeemer, where we are the dream, and you are the dreamer, with the fragrance of love from the Redeemer, where we are the dream, and you are the dreamer.
All right, Streams of Light podcast. Chris Anthony with you today. Hey, one of the things that I know a lot of us have looked at and struggled with in our own path of meditation and yoga and all that, one of the things we've all struggled with at some point in time, and I know I have, is how do you calm the mind for meditation? That's what I want to talk about today. Calming the mind for meditation. But before we get there, I'm going to actually read to you an interesting story that is kind of mind-boggling. I don't know if you've ever had a crisis, a legal crisis. There was a woman from Texas. This just came out in the news a few days ago. She had a felony charge. She found out she was a wanted felon. And so she was freaking out because they said, hey, you need to contact, this organization because, you're wanted for a felony. So she found out that it was a videotape it was over 20 years ago. A videotape had been rented from a store, one of these video stores that was big back in the 90s. And it was Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And she doesn't even remember renting that video. And she said she probably wouldn't have rented it. It was probably her roommate or something like that. Well, the store went out of business a long time ago, but they had filed a charge or whatever, and it stayed on the books, and it didn't go away. She had to go on the news, and once the news, broadcasted her dilemma, then they dropped the charge. But I thought about that. I thought about, like sometimes we have these things that happen. It could be from things that we did, bad decisions that we made, or it could be from like something like this, our roommate renting a video on our account and not returning it. But if you've ever gotten bad news like, oh, there's a warrant out for your arrest, or, you owe this money or whatever, it kind of freaks you out. And then when you get into it, you find out, well, this is a mistake. This is nothing. And that's so funny because the mind is, it runs with these things. The mind is so sensitive to problems that are perceived problems, that are mental constructs. And so today I want to look at, what about meditation? What about calming the mind? Because meditation is becoming mainstream in the United States, in the West, with all the yoga classes that are going on across the whole world, but specifically in the West. Yoga has become so big, and so many people have been practicing yoga, and they're wondering about, well, what about meditation? I know it's good for you. I know the doctor says that if I meditate, my blood pressure will drop. I'll get more healthy. I'll sleep better at night. All these things are true. And so everyone's on this path now of, I shouldn't say everyone, but there's a huge, enormous push towards health, wellness, and things like yoga and meditation. So as people are getting into yoga and into meditation, one of the things that they're discovering is when they attempt to meditate is, man, my mind does not want to cooperate with me. What do I do? And this is something that I can just say as a person who's practiced meditation for quite some time. This is not an uncommon, first of all, you're not alone. Many people, even before they meditate, come to the realization that they're a prisoner of their own mind, that their mind is very tormenting. We all lay in bed at night sometimes with the mind racing and thoughts about, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to pay that bill? What about this? What about that? And so a lot of people come to this realization before they even try to meditate. But then when you go to meditate and you actually go, okay, be still, mind. Once we actually try to still the mind, then we realize how hard and how difficult this thing called meditation can be. But fear not, there is hope. And I do want to say that as far as the mind goes, even though at times it seems like it's working against us, as we begin to practice meditation, as we begin to get into this practice of calming the mind, stilling the mind, we will find that the body will begin to rest, the mind will begin to rest. The mind, the body and the mind, for the most part, is out for your own good. When you learn new things, when you learn how to play piano, for example, when you first start learning, you have to pay very close attention and you have to look at the keys very carefully and think about it really hard. And then as time goes on, your body gets used to doing what you're doing. The mind and the body develop these pathways. And then, before you know it, a few years down the road, you can be playing at a dinner party at your house and you can be talking to people at the same time while you're playing your piano piece. So the mind is very adaptive. The mind and body do try and streamline everything. They try and make everything, it does try and make everything better over time. But sometimes it seems hard. And so when you first start to meditate, the first thing you notice is, okay, I'm going to sit still and I'm going to still my mind. Those two things can be very, very hard. And so a lot of people have noticed, and as a matter of fact, I was just talking to my daughter about this earlier, that a lot of people notice that after they do yoga, you go into the last pose, which is what? It's Shavasana. And when you go into that pose, what happens? You just realize after you've done a whole hour of yoga and all these exercises, you just realize how much more still the mind is. Many yoga teachers pick up on this and they'll say, notice how when you're in that last pose, they'll say, notice how your mind feels right now. Notice how calm and peaceful everything is. And so the practice of yoga normally precedes meditation. And this is something that is the way it's been designed. The body, when it comes under subjection to the yogic positions, will cooperate much, much better with the mind and the whole being to be still after one has practiced, yoga positions. But what I wanted to talk about today is how, when you begin to attempt to still the mind, when you try and make the mind quiet, what happens? The minute you try and still your mind, the minute you try to not think about anything, that's when it seems like it goes the other way, right? It goes 180 degrees in the other direction. Man, what the heck? So that's not an uncommon thing. As a matter of fact, that's why in the practice of meditation, one of the things we normally do, we not only do yoga before, because that will calm, the body will, greatly calm after doing yoga positions and the asanas. But one of the reasons why we do certain things before is because it just works better. And so one of the things that a lot of people will do in meditation before they go into just stillness of mind is they will do breathing exercises or pranayama. This is very, very important. A lot of times when we start our breathing exercises, we're doing a very coherent sort of practice. Like we'll have a inhale for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, hold for 10 seconds, and then exhale for 10 seconds, something like that. This creates a rhythm in the breathing and a coherence. And so you're actually creating this element. And this is what has happened also when you've done the yoga positions. When you've created when you've done the different yoga positions, you've started to create this coherence. And what they talk about in the East is something called chitta. And so chitta is can be considered the mind stuff. It can be considered consciousness. I noticed when I first started meditating that I would notice in my breathing practices that the chitta would be very disturbed at times, and it would be fluttering around. And I was starting to come into contact with my own energy field. And so when we do the breathing exercises in pranayama, we're bringing this coherence into our being, and we're creating a rhythm. And so when we create that rhythm, it's very important. And so this is next to the yoga positions, the asanas for calming the body and the mind. The next thing is the pranayama, the breathing exercises, which essentially start to move the energy around the body as well, as in addition to just doing, counting and coherence sort of breathing. And so then what begins to happen is after we finish the breathing exercises where we're counting, we will then shift into a mode where we're now observing our breath. And this is very, very important, because when you get to this phase of meditation and you're observing the breath, and by the way, a lot of yoga practitioners and meditation practitioners, they will do a chant. They will do some sort of mantra or chant, many times silently. And this will be incorporated sometimes in the observation mode of meditation. So it's very important that you observe the breath without judgment. After you've done your breathing exercises and you created that coherence in the body, and you've started to order the consciousness, the chitta, your energy field, and smooth it out by practice, now we are at a point in the process where we are beginning to simply observe the breath. And when we're observing the breath, we have to be very careful not to be judgmental, because, for example, if we just did yoga, our breath rate might be up a little bit. And you know how the mind works. The mind is like, wow, you're really out of breath. You're out of shape. This is kind of, again, the judgment thing will lead to more mental activity. The most important thing to do is simply observe. Not only observe your breath, but observe the mind. And as you're observing your breath, if your mind objects and says, wow, you're out of shape, you're breathing heavy, you just sort of nod and observe and don't make a judgment on it, and let the thought come and let it go. I always like to use the illustration of being at a bus stop. There's many buses that come to the bus stop. They're all going to their different locations. You are basically, as an observer in meditation, picture yourself sitting at a bus stop, and here comes a bus, and it's going downtown. You're not going downtown. So the bus pulls up, it opens up the door, and the driver looks at you and he says, "Are you getting on or not?" "What's up, bub? Are you getting on?" And you're not. So you don't even have to say anything. You don't even have to answer him, because he's just going to close the door and drive off. He's got a schedule to keep. And so that's the idea. But the minute you get on the bus, that's like engaging with thought. So the minute you get on the bus is the minute that you go, you know what? I probably am a little bit out of shape. My breathing is kind of heavy right now. Gosh, maybe tomorrow what I should do is wake up early. And there you go. Now you're on the bus and you're going downtown because you engaged in the thought. So the most important thing about observing thought is to think of it like that bus stop. Think of it like you're at a bus stop, but you're not getting on any buses, not downtown, not uptown, not midtown, nothing. And so don't even answer the bus drivers. That's like answering your thoughts, right? So this is how you do it. And so eventually what will begin to happen is, as you're observing your breath and your thoughts, the breath will eventually begin to slow. And the thoughts will eventually begin to subside. The minute you try and stop the thoughts from coming, the mind will object, and you will actually create a storm. In other words, you're actually creating a disturbance in your own energy field, in your own chitta. So it's very important, as the observer, as the watcher, to not stir the pot. And so we not stir the pot by observing, by watching. And so over time, you will get into this state more quickly and more quickly. So that's the good news, is even though you will notice that the mind is unruly and restless and very uncooperative at times, the bottom line is the mind will eventually learn to get into the groove. Your body will learn to get into it. And over time, you will find that you will not have the kind of disturbance in the mind and in the body that you had in the beginning. Now, it doesn't always happen like that overnight. Many people will testify that they had to work very hard at it. But here's the good news. This is what I want to throw out as the reward. This is the carrot in front of the horse, so to speak, that I want to throw out about the rewards of meditation. When you get to a place where finally the mind has subsided and calmed down, and when you get to a place where the body is so relaxed that the breathing rate has greatly subsided, that you're in a near breathless state. It's almost like when you're laying in bed at night and you hear that person next to you and you wonder if they're going to die because they breathe and then they stop and then there's nothing. And then you're thinking, really? And there's nothing. And you're like, uh-oh, time for CPR. And then what happens? They start breathing again, right? So this is kind of what happens to you when you're in a deep meditative state. It's almost like at night. You know, one of the great yogis of all time, I believe it was in the book Autobiography of a Yogi, and I think it was Lahiri Mahashaya who said this. He said, every human being becomes a yogi at night during sleep. And I just love that, because if you think about it, when the conscious mind turns off and when you go into a deep state of rest, the breathing is very shallow. It's very much like the Ujjayi breath that you hear yoga teachers talk about. And so the breath will reduce greatly, the mind will calm, and then something really, really amazing will begin to happen. You will begin to have this experience of what Vivekananda called the Purusa, the soul. And this is the part in the West that we have talked about as being part of the divine. You know, the Western scriptures say, and God breathed into man the breath of life. And so the idea is the soul, that part of us, not the mind, not the ego that runs on the platform of the body as a computer program for our own good, not the mind, not the ego, but the soul. You begin to experience a most amazing thing, that all these things that you've ever wanted or wondered about or desired are actually inside of you, because inside of you is a very, very powerful and yet very serene element, and that is your own soul, which is what? It's a reflection of divinity. It is an extension. It is a piece. It's a divine spark. You can call it what you want, but once you begin to experience that, it's like a new doorway opens to you to another world. And many other things will begin to happen at this point when the breathing. Now, by the way, the mind is going to be very tricky about this. The ego is very subtly twisted at times. For example, you might even remember me saying this, and then your mind will say, you know, after a while, we're supposed to not be breathing so much. And so what'll happen is the mind will get in there, the ego will get in there, and it will try and reduce your own breath rate for you. This is not the same thing. Getting into a semi-breathless state or a breathless state doesn't happen because you hold your breath. It just happens organically, just like the mind ceases to think organically over time. You can't try and stop your mind. You can't try and slow down your breath. You just have to go through these little courses, these little challenges of these obstacle courses. And then when you get to that point, when you finally get to that point where these things have happened on their own, not only will you begin to see the reflections of your own soul, the beauty. And some people will say, oh man, it's like I experienced God. Well, yeah. And maybe it was your own soul because it's so wonderfully divine. But then other things begin to happen. Many people have testified, and many people have seen in their own experience in meditation. They have, some people call it the subtle realms. Other people will simply call it their own chakras or energy, but you will begin to see things. And this is where it's hard, because as you begin to have mystical, because I'm moving into the element of mystical experiences. So once you get into the realm of mystical experiences, one of the biggest challenges in any contemplative practice is to not trigger the mind, because the absence of the mind is what got you there. The absence of the mind is what got you to experience what you're experiencing now. So once something begins to happen, what'll oftentimes happen the first few times or many times when you have a mystical experience, when you begin to see light or see color, or sometimes some people even see faces or have visions. Some people feel like they travel. Some people have out-of-body experiences. All these things can happen, but here's what will normally take place. Usually when something starts to happen, then we get excited. Our breath rate goes up. Our heart rate goes up. The mind kicks in. Oh man, that was amazing, wasn't it? And next thing you know, now you're back in what? You're back in mind. And that's okay. No harm done. But as time goes on, when these mystical experiences happen, you'll begin to look at them with what astronomers call averted vision. Averted vision is what astronomers would use when they look through, if they're not looking through a telescope through a computer screen. If you're actually looking through an eyepiece, looking through a telescope, you don't look directly at the galaxy, you kind of look away, because at the extremity, at the corners of your extremities of your retina, or what the sensitive cones of the retina. And so this is a technique called averted vision. So you're looking at a galaxy, but you're kind of like looking away from it, but you're kind of peeking back at it. And this is the best example that I can find. The example of averted vision is, what they call in astronomy. Averted vision is the best example of what I could name this, because what happens is when mystical experiences begin to take place, you sort of pretend like you're not looking. And it's kind of hard to explain that. That's about the best I can do to lead you in the right direction. So when these things would happen, then what you would do is you would sort of just observe it without judgment, almost like the bus driver who pulled up. And you can't get excited and go, wow, I want this to happen. And because my experience is, what ends up happening is it begins to fade and it goes away. So, and the other trap in meditation is, once you've had, and you will have, if you stick with meditation, if you stick with it, and if you really work at it, you will begin to have experiences. The challenge will then be to not get into the meditation for the sake of the experience, because that's the big trap is, wow, I had this crazy experience, I had an out-of-body experience, or I saw, my grandmother, or, I saw this beautiful white light, and then I was like being bathed in this love, and these things are great. And it's only natural that when we go back to meditate the next time, and the next time after that, and the next week, and the next month, and next year, to be thinking of that wonderful white light experience. Because after all, it's like otherworldly, right? In a way, if I were to be honest with you, I'd say that's why we meditate, right? To have these transcendental experiences. That's why we meditate, because we want to know that A, we're not alone, B, all is well, and C, there's there's this great other thing beyond this body. That's one of the huge things about meditation. As you get deeper into it, you really do begin to understand that the body is just a house you live in, and you begin to really sense that, that soul part of you is really bigger than the body, and the soul part of you is the part that can't die. And, all these people who get on and testify of their near-death experiences, you begin to understand why they say the things they do, because you can have these experiences in meditation. So we all want to know that we're part of something bigger than just ourselves or little old me. We all want to know that there's more to life than just, the grind of this earth, and, the cares and concerns about pollution and climate change and wars and death and disease and pain and suffering. We all want to know that there's more than that. And the truth is you will find out in meditation that there is, and you will begin to see things from a different perspective. The challenge is to not let the fruit of meditation become the main course, but rather to stick with the things that got you to those experiences to begin with, which is simply winding down the body, winding down the mind through these practices. Now, I practice a form of meditation and yoga called Kriya, and Kriya means movement. And so the beautiful thing about Kriya is that in the practice of Kriya, we purposefully move life force energy, just like you do in pranayama, you actually move it through the body. So it's kind of funny because many people who practice Kriya believe that it's one of the most effective, and I do believe this too, it's one of the most effective ways to still the mind and the body. And so in a way, what I'm saying is one of the most effective ways to still the mind and the body is through movement. And not only the yogic positions, the asanas, which is physical movement, but also through the movement of pranayama, movement of breath. And so how do you get still? How do you get your mind and your body still? You move. And well, I'm trying to stop my mind from thinking, well, just keep moving. And in that sense, you do these aspects of meditation, you do these pranayamas, you do these breath movements, these energetic movements. And as you do, the most amazing thing happens. Everything just begins to blossom. You know, it's all around us in life, if you think about it, isn't it? This organic pattern that's in nature, you know? I mean, you put a little water in a flower pot and this thing, you go to bed and you wake up in the morning and this orchid is just, it's opened up overnight. And so you didn't really have to do it. You just had to, you know, you had to provide it some sunlight, you had to provide it the water, but how that flower opens up and all that, I mean, it's a mystery. Well, it's not totally a mystery, but you get the idea. It's a mystery to me. I didn't make it open up, but I did some work. And so that's what meditation's like. You know, you do the yoga asanas, you do the pranayams, you do all these things, and then something happens on its own organically. And that's what we're after. I mean, there's a reason why people put flowers on their altars, guys. The reason why they put flowers on their altars, and this is, I've always been fascinated about the floral scents. A lot of people talk about, you know, that's one of the heavenly gifts we have here on earth. If you smell a flower, it can take you to a different place. I mean, floral scents are like the scents of the other world. They're like the scents of heaven. And so that's why people put flowers on their altars, because when they look at their altar and they have their little incense on there or whatever, they see the flowers and it's like a sign of another world. It's like a sign of a better place. But yet that place is here. It's starting here and it's starting now. So we bring it. We bring it into this world. We bring it into our own life by these practices. So that's my thought for today. My thought is, I think, been explained pretty clearly, that meditation, it's coming up fast in the West. Yoga's here, meditation, it's on the rise. Stilling the mind, it's possible. It's a challenge in the beginning, but there is hope. And then there's reward. The beautiful light of your own soul. This is Streams of Light podcast. I'm Chris Anthony. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I wish you well in your journey.